Hey everyone, it's another step on the UFL journey again. Today, we're going to talk about the backend, and I'm joined by two key people in backend development, Oleg and Dmitry. They're going to tell us something about what their team is doing to create truly fair matchmaking and how they work on the stable connection quality for all users. We'll also discuss data protection and what the backend actually does. To be honest, I knew very little about it before this interview. Please share your thoughts on what we're discussing today, and also let us know what else you'd like to see on the journey, the kind of things you'd like discussed in more detail. Tell us what you'd like in this update so we can keep it going in future updates on the way. We're keen to hear from you. Anyway, here goes. Hey, Dima.
Hey.
Today, we decided to chat in a more unconventional setting. Wanted to mix things up a bit. Hey, Oleg.
Hey, Tigran.
I'm glad to finally meet you, even if it's remotely. Let's get straight down to business. Please help me understand what the backend is all about so that I and most of our viewers can be brought up to speed on that.
The back-end part of the game deals with serving requests from users in the metagame tier. In other words, the invisible structure of the game.
In our company, the back-end is a set of online services that allow players to interact with each other. It includes matchmaking, finding opponents, and also involves some operations with the metagame.
Lots of things related to club creation, like changing and buying footballers. We also ensure that users find each other to play online matches.
Data storage, data preservation, authorization. In an online mode, the back-end team is responsible for the server's load management. Online games have a massive number of users, so there's a need to store and process an absolutely huge amount of data for all of them. We have to be able to process it flawlessly. So, to sum up, the backend is a set of online services that allow users from all over the world to interact with each other. It also enables manipulations with in-game properties and makes sure that servers can withstand even the heaviest load.
And now a question for you, Dima, that I forgot to mention right at the start. What are the differences between your work, your responsibilities, and Oleg's? How do you two interact together? How do you distribute tasks between the two of you? I think it'll help us all understand the structure of your team better and your answers.
Yes. I'm directly involved in planning the working process and managing the team. I'm responsible for task planning, prioritizing features, synchronizing parallel processes, and it's my responsibility to coordinate our team with producers and game designers from other departments. Namely, I'm the project manager of the backend. That means I work more as the liaison between our team, the other teams, and external processes. I need to ensure our backend team completes the assigned task to a quality level within the time frame and properly coordinated. In contrast, Oleg is a technical expert. He's a game architect. This means that he oversees and controls the development of all the technologies, internal tools, and the mechanics that are created in our department. Oleg and I work together to develop and coordinate different solutions, implement them, and distribute them to other teams. Then, on the other hand, we can also decide when it's time to seek help from the other teams. And then I work to communicate those needs, and we work really closely together.
And you complement each other, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's move on to the metagame. Tell us more about how it relates to the backend and how it affects the game.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the metagame encompasses all the logic behind things like choosing clubs, kits, in-game purchases, and a whole load of other stuff that players will enjoy using in the game.
Stuff such as club customization, stadium settings, team adjustments, selecting kits, choosing specific equipment, that's the metagame. Basically, everything a user would engage in, apart from actually playing a football match, refers to the metagame.
And to explain how this looks from our perspective, as back-end developers, it goes like this. We have clients. We have our back-end that exists somewhere else. Let's call this place the cloud. And within the cloud, there are various services that process the requests made by each client. When a client sends a request to us, we process them. We pack them to the databases, and that means before the next match, the user would be able to use any of their previously saved formations, and on top of that, they wouldn't lose their purchased players or their other properties. The scheme sounds simple, clients and requests. But then there are the implications. There'll be a huge number of players generating a significant load to the game's servers, and in designing this system, we took into consideration scalability, use of resources, and so on.
As we're talking about an online game, I have to take this opportunity to ask you about matchmaking in UFL. How does that work? Are there any unique features we can look forward to? Can you let us know anything about that?
Well, matchmaking in an online game, especially in a football simulator like UFL, is one of the most important mechanics. It plays an absolutely pivotal role. And honestly, I'm afraid I can't disclose many details of how the matchmaking works in UFL. But as the term suggests, matchmaking is basically a set of algorithms that make matches between opponents based on some known personal parameters of each player. Those parameters could be positive things, like the player's stats compared to others and their rating in online matches, but at the same time, there are a large number of negative parameters that will also influence the matchmaking. Things like penalties for leaving matches and injuries in a player's team. Based on those parameters, a player's weight is calculated, and that becomes a baseline. They will define what we call a player's weight, and that's what we use for the matchmaking process. We're looking to find the best possible opponent. Another important aspect of matchmaking is geography. By that I mean the actual locations of the player and their opponent.
Yes, that's right. Of course, we can match them, see how well they play, and define their locations. But there are still factors that could well affect their experience. I'm talking about the type of connection. The first type of connection is peer-to-peer. In other words, when two clients in different places are connected to each other over the internet and communicate with each other. One of them acts as the server, the other as the client. However, there may be a number of issues down to the quality and type of internet connection they are using, and understandably, those issues could give one of the players an advantage. First of all, let's consider the connection at the server's end. If they have a faster connection, they will therefore have a more responsive interface, and therefore their experience will be much better. To solve this issue, we decided we had to start using dedicated servers. That means to start a match, two players will connect as usual, but we don't connect them directly with each other. Instead, we connect both opponents to a separate remote server that we have on our back-end side. Going back to the cloud idea, that is our dedicated server hovering in the middle. It's like the hub taking care of all the logic and connection mechanics, and our users connect to this dedicated server and then interact with each other indirectly. This system is much more convenient. For a start, the players will get a significantly better user experience, one that's less dependent on the end user's tech. Besides, our servers will be able to provide a better quality of connection, higher performance rates, and it will help to neutralize any disadvantages and keep the game fair.
During my conversations with both you and Oleg, I often hear references to data collection. You mentioned that UFL users will be providing you with some data. Could you please expand on that for us? Clarify what sort of data you need, why it's necessary, and how much personal info you're going to collect and store?
All the data we collect, all possible analytics, are a main tool in allowing us to predict players' behavior. What's more, by using the real data, we can get a clear sense of which mechanics or features work correctly and, likewise, which ones don't. For example, we collect data on how users interact with the metagame aspects, stuff from before the match, like their settings, the formations they choose, and so on. And then we collect data about the user's matches after they kick off. how the user plays, how the ball behaves, including things like the number of touches, the player's trajectories, etc. First and foremost, this helps us get a load of data about game balance. That way, we can determine which mechanics are working well and which aren't performing as well as we'd like. Then we can get to work to improve them going forward. It's not about having total control, it's more about improvement. This is one of the few ways we can definitively know how our game is actually working and performing. Analytics also serve to collect technical metrics. I mean, realistically, not everything will always go perfectly in the game. There could be different bugs and issues of all types and varieties. Not all users are going to report an issue when they spot it. Also, it's not always necessary to deal with them through human intervention.
I'm also interested in the personal side of your work. How do you feel when you're working on UFL? Do you feel like there's a big burden of responsibility? Is there stuff in the game that really stands out for you that you're really proud of? Seems to me users don't normally consider game developers' personal feelings when thinking about that industry.
Well, as I said before, there is a project facade, and then behind that, there's our backyard. I guess it could feel a bit upsetting that users don't see exactly what we do. But then again, we have a large back-end team here, and we get to do a lot of cool stuff. I have to say, it is frustrating sometimes that we manage to create some unique approaches, we solve extremely ambitious challenges, and none of that is visible to the users. They don't even think about what we do when it all works well. Not until something goes wrong and breaks. Then they think about us. On the other hand, being anonymous might also be a plus. The aim is that users enjoy the game. Full stop, nothing more. And when any problems do occur, they're covered by our team.
As far as I'm concerned, absolutely. Being involved in a AAA project is a mixture of excitement and nerves at the same time. With any new task or feature we add, if we implement a new functionality, add some options, or just polish some older stuff to make it perfect, every single time I think about how it's going to be judged and used by a massive number of people. And while the back end is not visible like other parts of the game, it is still super demanding. Yes, there's a certain burden of responsibility, of course, there's bound to be, but from my perspective, it isn't always hanging heavily on us. Mainly because we consciously try to distract ourselves from it, so it doesn't get in the way of our work. We focus more on delivering good features of great quality, and all with the aim of improving the standard of the game as much as we can.
What you're talking about suggests there's going to be a heavy load on your online services. Isn't that going to be tricky? How do you deal with that prospect?
Yeah, of course. This is a super tricky issue. Believe me, we're doing everything we can to be prepared. You can't just ignore it. So we conduct a lot of testing, trying to stress our system with the kind of realistic load we're expecting. On top of that, we conduct some high-load testing too. Load testing is one of several procedures that are pretty standard. We do it to check how our system behaves under the load we'd expect from the amount of users we hope to see in UFL when it goes live. And another procedure we perform is stress testing. In this, we try to deliberately overload our system. This is also a standard check, and there are many ways to perform it and get the results you want. We've taken one of the existing solutions and enhanced it, changed it in line with our needs, and created an Autobot. It's a bot designed to simulate user behavior. We can comfortably predict how users will generally behave. Things like which screens they'll access most often, what actions they'll perform, and so on. So we've built up profiles of how users will tend to react. We take that information and put all of it together to create what we call a load profile. Once that's created, we feed it into our Autobot for further analysis. It can replicate the predicted behavior hundreds of thousands of times, and each time it emulates the huge crowds of users. Of course, thanks to this automation, we can easily conduct that kind of test very often, up to several times a week. Every time we observe carefully what happens. If something goes wrong, we fix it. We keep iterating to the point where we are sure that everything in our system is top-notch.
That's cool. So rather than sit and wait for any problems to occur, you're simulating with similar loads to unearth them?
Exactly. That's precisely what we'll do. And besides, this way we are preparing standard pipelines of how we should behave if something does go awry, after the release, when we'll be on air. Using these established pipelines, we'll be able to fix things while, most likely, users won't notice anything.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time. I've learned a lot today. And of course, I look forward to our next meeting, and we'll prepare some new questions for you when the game is ready for release.
I will happily answer all your questions when we meet again. Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Let's discuss your plans going forward, Dima. What's on your team's task list now?
We still have a whole bunch of tasks to get through, and obviously everyone knows the work doesn't stop as soon as the game's released. There are still going to be plenty of tasks for us to tackle. As I mentioned earlier, at the moment we have matchmaking as a big focus in our plans. It's always going to be one of the most significant parts of the game functionality. Right now, we are very much focused on polishing it and, at the same time, adding a few improvements. We're constantly working on enhancing it, working on the user's parameters, those matchmaking weights I talked about earlier. And then, of course, we're currently working on data security and dedicating a significant amount of time to predicting and then dealing with any server load issues. As Oleg mentioned, we're able to regularly conduct the load and overload tests, as well as working on the load models, thanks to our automated testing bots. And unsurprisingly, we still stumble upon the odd issue that needs improving. And that happens in all these systems. So, in answer to your question, our tasks for the future are security, server load, and matchmaking.
So it's just the existing mechanics that you're now refining and improving. Everything's already been created, and it just needs to be carefully brought to completion. There's nothing left that you'll be starting from scratch on. Am I right?
Thankfully, yes, you are. For the most part, I'd say we already have all the mechanics for the game pretty much ready to go. Nevertheless, we continue to improve them according to extra requirements from the game designer, as well as, obviously, our own experiments, tests, and conclusions, and keep polishing them to perfection.
Okay. Now, just before we finish, I have a simple question for you, which hopefully has a simple answer. Try not to think about your answer too much, okay? The question is simply, what do you like most about your work? What would you say brings you the most satisfaction?
Working with creative people. You see, when you're making a video game, any kind of video game, it's impossible to be a non-creative person. Impossible. Because of the demands of the work, you always have to evoke emotions, to trigger impacts, to keep the motivation high in your team. So, there's your simple answer. For me, personally, I'd say the most important thing is being surrounded by people who are not only creative, but also super professional and who know exactly what they're doing. In case you couldn't tell, I'm really happy to be working in this team and with the guys from the back end.
In other words, what you've done there is prove to anyone out there who thinks that the work in the back end is dry and purely technical stuff that it's nothing like that at all. That's cool.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that's it from us.